Hello everybody, I am Tom and you are watching my Speculative class guide series for Larian Studios' upcoming Baldur's Gate 3. As noted, because Baldur's Gate 3 is not out yet and we don't know everything, this video is speculative. This is based off the Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition ruleset, which Larian has said they're going to base their own ruleset off as closely as practical, so I feel pretty confident using it as a baseline for these videos. If you're unaware of any of the basic concepts around D&D or Baldur's Gate more generally, I have a tutorial kind of video about the basics of D&D that you can find right here, or in the description. But without further ado, today we're going to take a look at... The Sorcerer is a being of inherent magic. They don't learn their spells or study their magic, it just flows through them like a river, or in some cases, a thunderous waterfall. Sorcerers gain their magic through either hereditary, or from exposure to arcane wild magic. As such, their magic is often potent and sometimes uncontrollable. As always, I'll go through the class abilities in order of acquisition, starting with the inherent features. The Sorcerer has a hit die of 1d6 per Sorcerer level. So this means at first level you have 6 HP plus your Constitution modifier, and every level above first you gain 1d6 or the average of 4 plus your Constitution modifier hit points per level. As for proficiencies, you're not proficient in any armor. Most sorcerers don't walk around wearing armor. You have proficiency in daggers, darts, slings, quarterstaffs, and light crossbows. You have no tool proficiencies, and your saving throws are Constitution and Charisma, interestingly. It's always struck me as kind of strange that Constitution is one of their saving throws, but I mean it's a relatively useful one to have, so let's go with it. As for their skills, you get to choose 2 from either Arcana, Deception, Insight, Intimidation, Persuasion, and Religion. The Sorcerer is one of the easiest types of spellcasting to understand in Baldur's Gate 3. They know a certain amount of spells, and they have a certain number of spell slots. They'll be shown on the table, it is up right now. And they can cast any spell that they know, as long as they have an applicable spell slot. There's no selecting spells for the day, there's no writing spells into your grimoire, you simply know these spells, and you have this many spell slots, so you can cast them. Charisma is their spellcasting ability, and sorcerers can use an arcane focus rather than components if they want to cast spells, so they can choose to do that. At first level, unlike most classes, you get to choose your subclass, or your sorceress origin. We'll go over the features for these a bit later, but the 2 confirmed subclasses are the Draconic Bloodline or the Wild Magic Sorcerer. Moving on to level 2, you gain the Font of Magic feature, more commonly known just as the Sorcery Points. Starting at level 2, you have 2 Sorcery Points that can be used for multiple actions going forward. As you level, you gain more sorcery points, as shown on the table right here, and as of level 2, they only really have one purpose, which is you can convert them into regaining a lost or a used spell slot. For instance, if you use all of your spells, you can take 2 sorcery points and you can spend them to get a first level spell slot back. It's worth noting this conversion can be done in the other direction, i.e. you can spend your spell slots to gain sorcery points back, which obviously at level 2 doesn't really do anything for you, so you'd never do it, but going forward you can see why this will be helpful. At level 3 is where your sorcery points really start to come into their own, with meta magic. This allows you to spend sorcery points to mold and alter your spells to better suit your needs. At level 3 you get to choose 2 of the following meta magic options, and you gain another one at level 10. First option is Careful Spell. When you cast a spell that forces other creatures to make a saving throw, you can protect some of those creatures from the spell's full force. To do so, you spend 1 sorcery point and choose a number of those creatures up to your Charisma modifier. A chosen creature automatically succeeds at saving throw against that spell. Next, we have Distant Spell. When you cast a spell that has a range of 5 feet or greater, you can spend 1 sorcery point to double the range of that spell. When you cast a spell that has a range of Touch, you can spend 1 sorcery point to make the range of that spell 30 feet. This is really, really cool, one of my favourite. Being able to use touch spells at a distance is huge. Next up we have Empowered Spell. When you roll damage for a spell, you can spend 1 sorcery point to reroll a number of the damage's dice up to your Charisma modifier. You must use the new rolls, so you can't choose between them, so if you roll worse on your second ones, you have to take the second. But you can use Empowered Spell even if you've already used a different metamagic option during the casting of the spell. It's worth noting these metamagics don't actually take like bonus actions or anything to use, so if it allows you to use 2, like Empowered Spell for instance, you can use, like, say, Distant Spell, the previous one we talked about, and Empowered Spell. You can do both on one spell, which is kind of insane. Next up, we have Extended Spell. When you cast a spell that has a duration of 1 minute or longer, you can spend 1 sorcery point to double its duration, to a maximum of 24 hours. Heightened Spell. When you cast a spell that forces a creature to make a saving throw to resist its effects, you can spend 3 sorcery points to give one target of the spell disadvantage on its first saving throw made against that spell. So effectively you just force disadvantage, which is actually quite powerful. Next we have Quicken Spell. When you cast a spell that has a casting time of 1 action, you can spend 2 sorcery points to change the casting time to 1 bonus action for this casting. Moving on, we have Subtle Spell. When you cast a spell, you can spend 1 sorcery point to cast it without any somatic or verbal components, which means that essentially you can cast it without giving anybody any indication that you're casting the spell. You don't have to do any hand movements, you don't have to say anything, you can just cast the spell straight out by standing completely still, or, notably, with your hands tied behind your back, and a gag in your mouth. Very useful. Next we have Twinned Spell. When you cast a spell that targets only one creature and doesn't have a range of self, you can spend a number of sorcery points equal to the spell's level to target a second creature in range within the same spell. 1 sorcery point if it's a cantrip. This is interesting. The kind of outlier of this, to be eligible, a spell must be incapable of targeting more than one creature at the spell's current level. For example, Magic Missile and Scorching Ray aren't eligible, but Ray of Frost and Chromatic Orb are. Let's say take Firebolt, for instance. This is a fairly good one. Firebolt is a spell that targets a creature at a range. So, you can use Twin Spell to fire it, and you fire 2 Firebolts. It's useful, but this kind of caveat is needed because it's overpowered otherwise, but like something like Magic Missile. The way that Magic Missile works is that you fire out 3 Magic Missiles that you can choose which targets they go to, and it automatically hits. It just hits, there's nothing they can do to block it. What this means, however, is if you're using Twin Spell, and you use a high enough spell slot, Magic Missile could be just firing out like 20-something bolts, which is a lot of damage. I don't know, it's very limited, Twin Spell. However, it is good. It's quite good. It's just, Every time I've used it, it's come across as weak comparatively. I don't know, we'll see. It really depends on what spells I have in Baldur's Gate 3 as well, because your spell options really kind of dictate how good Twin Spell is. But moving on, at level 4 and again at level 8, as with all subclasses, you get an ability score improvement or a feat choice. And believe it or not, that's it for the features. Everything else comes from the subclass. The Sorcerer is actually a rather simple class to understand. They don't have like a large variety of things they can do, but what they do, which is incredibly powerful magic, they do very, very well. But with that, we can move on to the Sorcerer's origins, starting with the Draconic bloodline. A sorcerer who has either made a magical pact with a dragon, or, more commonly, has ancestry who made such pacts, or even can trace back their line to a dragon as a direct ancestor. Dragon sex is weird. They can freely shapeshift. Shit's weird. Anyway, as a Dragonblood sorcerer at level 1, you can choose what type of dragon you had in your ancestry. This has different effects later on, but if you're unaware of dragon lore in D&D, the elemental power of a dragon is determined by their colour, or vice versa, I guess. But a classic fire-breathing dragon, for instance, is either red or gold, whereas a green dragon has poison breath, or a bronze dragon has lightning breath. Yep, lightning breath. That's a thing. The table up now shows the possible colour choice and the associated element with that. With this choice, you can also speak, read, and write Draconic, and whenever you make a charisma check when interacting with dragons, your proficiency bonus is doubled, assuming you have proficiency in the first place. For instance, you're trying to convince a blue dragon that you shouldn't be electrocuted and then eaten, because your bones are far too brittle and you have no meat on you anyhow. Also at level 1, you gain Draconic Resilience. Your Draconic blood is manifest in your form. At level 1, you have an additional 1 hit point, and this continues for every level above first. Every time you level up, you gain 1 additional hit point over whatever you roll. Additionally, parts or even all of your skin is covered in a thin kind of dragon-like scales, and when you're unarmored, i.e. you're wearing nothing but robes or clothes, you have armor class of 13 plus your dexterity modifier, making you much tougher than the average wizard. And at 6th level, you gain Elemental Affinity. Whenever you cast a spell of your ancestor's type, for instance, fire damage for gold and ancestry, you can add your charisma modifier to 1 damage roll of that spell. Additionally, you can spend 1 sorcery point to gain resistance to that damage type for a full hour. But that's actually it for the Dragon Sorcerer up to level 10, so we can move on to the chaotic nature of the Wild Magic Sorcerer. Wild magic comes from many sources, whether it be a curse, or blessing, from a demon or a fae, or exposure to raw magic from a planar portal, or simply a fluke accident of a mutated birth. Wild magic sorcerers are marked by a power of chaos, and their magic is unpredictable and often dangerous to others as well as themselves. Starting at level 1, you have the Tides of Chaos attached to your magic. Whenever you cast a spell of 1st level or higher, i.e. not a cantrip, there is a chance that your magic will surge uncontrollably. We'll go over the possible effects of this a little later. However, You can also manipulate this chaos, bending it to your will. Once per long rest, you can gain advantage on any one attack roll, saving throw, or ability check of your choice. If your magic does surge out of control before you take the long rest, you actually gain this feature back. So it's like a kind of balance of karma. The idea, you kind of control the chaos and bend it to your will, and then if the chaos explodes, you can then do it again. If that doesn't happen, you have to take a long rest before you can use this feature again. And then at 6th level, you can bend the luck of those around you as well. As a reaction, you can spend 2 sorcery points to add or subtract 1d4 from any attack roll, saving throw, or ability check from any creature that you can see. So if an enemy is attacking one of your friends, you can subtract a 1d4 off their attack roll. If your friend is trying to jump over a gap and they almost fall, you can add 1d4 to their saving throw, that kind of thing. You may be asking how exactly this magical surge happens. It's a bit nebulous at this moment for knowing how it will activate, particularly in Baldur's Gate 3, and what those effects might be. In D&D, it's largely up to kind of DM discretion when and how the wild magic surge will manifest. So how this will translate, dunno. I assume just it'll be an RNG chance, but we'll have to see. As for the effects of the magic surge, it's up, right now I have the official table from the 5th edition rules, and it seems pretty likely to me that these are going to be the effects that Larian's going to implement in Baldur's Gate 3. But again, this remains to be seen. They may come up with their own, they may add to this list, they may take some out. It's hard to say. I won't go over all these individually, but please feel free to pause and read through the table to get an idea of what the kind of random bullshit that can happen from wild magic is. One of my personal favourites is turning yourself into a potted plant for 1 minute. It's fantastic stuff. But now we'll move on to my thoughts and suggestions for playing a Sorcerer in Baldur's Gate 3. As I stated earlier, Charisma is your spellcasting ability score, so a high Charisma is always needed. As for secondary scores, Dexterity is really good here, particularly for Dragon Sorcerer since you already have an increased AC, so just having a higher Dexterity, you can really make yourself rather durable. And as a spellcasting class, that's actually quite good, considering you have relatively low HP with the 1d6. Having higher AC is quite useful. Again, I say this on every class as well, Constitution is always really good, because more health means less death as a general rule. As for race choice, the obvious optimal choices are those that give you a Charisma boost. Drow are notable here because they give you a +1 into Charisma and a +2 into Dexterity. So that makes for some relatively high ACs, particularly paired with your Draconic bloodline. Half-Elves are also an amazing choice as they get 2 into Charisma and +1 into 2 other stats of their choice. So for me, I'd do +2 Charisma, +1 into Dex, +1 into Constitution. Once again, really bulky Sorcerer. Finally, Lightfoot Halflings and Tieflings also make good choices for pretty much exactly the same reason. They get Charisma buffs, the Halfling also gets some into Dex, which is nice. As for subclass choice, I've always liked the theming of the Dragonblood Sorcerer a lot, but it's always really hard for me to pass up the true random bullshit that can occur with wild magic. As with all my suggestions, this is clearly down to personal preference. You can choose not to be optimal, you can choose optimal and metagame the hell out of it. But just be prepared for some really random shit if you choose the wild magic sorcerer. Up to and including having your sorcerer die and immediately being reincarnated as a different race. Weird shit can happen. Anyway, that's it for the sorcerer. If you like this video, please leave a like. If you're not subscribed, please consider subscribing. And as always, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye guys.